It makes you want the games back, doesn't it? Well, I'm delighted to say that our first guest this evening is Uachtaráin Cummanlú Classcale, John Horan, who's going to address the GAA community about the issues that are most concerning them. John, thank you very much for joining us. My first question is really an attempt to cut to the chase. Will Gaelic games be played at any level while there is social distancing in place?
I can't see it happening, to be quite honest, because if social distancing is a priority to deal with this pandemic, I don't know how we can play a contact sport, and that is what Gaelic Games is. It is a contact sport.
Well, the government roadmap, which was announced last Friday week by Leo Varadkar, they said Gaelic Games could resume on July 20th. Did the GAA have an input into that announcement?
We've been working with the Department of Sport in a general level with other sporting organisations, but no, we weren't involved in any specific details that were put into the plan.
So did that announcement take you by surprise a little?
I think everybody was taken by surprise on Friday night because nobody really knew what was coming. So I think it did give everybody a bit of an uplift to feel that we were coming back. But we had to examine it and look at it closely. And, you know, there was a concept in it that, you know, people could gather together in groups of 4. But we felt that that just couldn't be marshalled within our clubs. And that's why we continue to keep our premises closed, because our clubs are led by a load of good quality volunteer people, and to put the onus on the volunteers within our organisation to make the decisions to police and organise, you know, training within their facilities, we just felt that that would be too much on them. And I've had contact since from 1 or 2 club chairmen and said thanks for taking it out of our hands, because we were concerned how we were going to actually police it within our own grounds. Because
a club with a lot of teams would have a lot of groups of 4 wanting.
Absolutely, Des. And like, you know yourself, like you'd have a group of 4 gathering here and another group of 4, and all of a sudden then you'd have a full squad gathering, and then the next thing, you know, after a period of that training, they'd probably push on and you could have a game behind closed doors or something, you know.
But when it was announced on the Friday night, games back in July 20, I know in my own club there was lots of excitement up. Did you get much reaction to that?
We did actually, yeah. We got a lot of calls on the Saturday, Sunday and Monday, people looking for clarification as to what the GAA's position was. So, like, we took our time, we issued our release on Wednesday, but we had consulted with our county chairman and with our management committee before we came out with that release. And I think we have taken the right decision in this matter. I think people's health and people's safety is the key to it all.
And I presume you're getting medical advice as well, are you?
We are, yeah. Well, we're taking our advice predominantly from NEFIT and the information that they're giving out to us, but we're also setting up our own advisory group within the organisation, and we'd hope that they will in time link in with NEFIT and get a roadmap approved by them, created by us, to actually get a proper return to play and use of our facilities.
You didn't say specifically in your statement last Wednesday the games will resume on July 20th. Am I right? You'll just review it then?
Yeah, no, that's a date that we have set out, and the same with the October date as well. They're dates that we feel, you know, possibly a return will happen. If things improve, and hopefully they may, them dates can be looked at and reviewed. They can be reviewed in either manner. They can be reviewed to be brought forward, or they can be reviewed to be pushed back out. But as it stands, we feel that both those dates are a safe call on the situation at the moment.
And is it fair to say social distancing is ultimately what is going to decide this?
Well, absolutely. Like, I mean, you know yourself, like, you have it here on the Sunday game. The level of contact that goes on in our sport, like, I would have a concern of putting people into contact sport and then returning to their families. Like, I was talking to one club manager during the week, and he said that there was 4 brothers on the squad that he's managing, and they have told him they're not going back because their father is elderly, he has an underlying health issue, and they're not prepared to take the risk of actually bringing anything home to their father. You know?
Were you surprised in that government statement, because they said GAA and soccer could resume on July 20 and close physical contact sports such as rugby, boxing and wrestling would be August? Were you surprised GAA wasn't considered a close physical contact sport?
Well, first of all, I was delighted to see that, you know, the government viewed sport as being important and actually did include it in the document, and I think everybody involved in sport would feel that way. Yeah. But I suppose when you look at the level of contacts within sports, scrums in rugby are probably at a different level than ours, but I don't think to say our games are non-contact is correct, no.
So on July 20, when you review things, I know it's not you personally, your COVID committee meets, what will they be looking at?
Well, we'll be taking our information from the actual health authorities to see, is it safe? And it's only an if and when it's safe that we will actually return and allow training and our games to actually recommence. And taking that information on board, then we'll make that decision. And we won't bring it right up to the line. We'll be working on that on a constant. We're on executive calls every day, and we keep reviewing and updating on things. So we'll be staying on top of this for the next period of weeks and hopefully come out with the right decision.
Okay, so the difference between the GAA, say, and the professional teams, professional sports that are talking about going back in small group training, you will not go back to small group training because you cannot put all of that onus on club committees.
Absolutely. Like I'm not going to pass that responsibility over to the club volunteer who does a great job for us to actually make those decisions. And professional sport is in a different league because they don't go back into work and they can be cocooned away from family situations. But we can't do that, and we won't.
What would you say to Davy Fitzgerald, who said inter-county training should not have been suspended?
Our decision to, cancel the inter-county training, that really came from taking the responsibility of the collective away from players and just to give them a chance to just ease it back a bit. I would have no problem with Davy's idea of staying in contact on a personal level with his players, looking after their mental health and their well-being. And even if Davy gives the players a programme, because we know ourselves, players throughout the winter do look after themselves and carry on with an individual programme. But I don't think it should be up at a level with an anticipation of games coming up shortly.
Liam Lenihan of the Munster Council pointed out that insurance could be an issue. Now, I know it's a big question to ask you, but have you discussed if a club player's insurance policy would cover him if he suffered any COVID issues?
Yeah, under our present policy, and I've checked this out, our players would be covered for COVID, provided we don't do anything that's unsafe, right? And that's part of our decision-making process, not to be doing anything in terms of resuming games. So that's a factor. Going forward, I think insurance companies probably will exclude pandemics from insurance policies, but as it stands up until the 31st of October, if our players involved in training or playing, they would be covered under the policy. But again, we would have to make a very clear decision that we've actually put them in a safe environment to actually play our games.
So the responsibility is heaping up on you on different levels, obviously, different levels.
Absolutely. There's a lot of people out there and they're writing with opinions and they're expressing opinions on the airwaves and whatever. But, and I value everyone's view and everyone's entitled to it. But ultimately, there is a huge responsibility there to get this right. And, if one GAA club, be it its playing area or whatever, developed into what is considered now a word that we use, cluster, for the COVID-19, I think that would be a very bad day's work on our part. And that's one thing we're very conscious, that none of our facilities are going to become a cluster.
One area, you don't want groups assembling on the pitches. One area, though, is people walking around the pitches. Some rural clubs have walking tracks because it's difficult for people to walk on the roads, etc. And they're closed at the moment. Would you consider reopening those? Yeah,
that actually topic took a lot of debate on our part. One of the reasons why we maintained the closure was that, if you remember back to the first 2 weeks before there was a total shutdown, when we shut down on training and we shut down on games, we left the walkways open. But what we actually found was the supervision of the walkways only being used became very difficult, because what was happening is, once the walkways were opening, the pitches and the playing areas were open and people were turning up on the playing areas.
And the kids were going on the
pitches. And you had fellas turning up saying, in groups of 2, and all of a sudden there was 6 or 7 of your senior team there kicking ball together. So it's something we're looking at. We may introduce it on a supervised time period for the elderly to actually get down to our grounds and do it, but it's not off the agenda. In terms of priority, I can understand why the GAA needs the inter-county scene to come back commercially and financially, and that's one issue. But on the other hand, the club is most members. Which will get priority when resumption comes? We're quite comfortable to say that we're going to go with the club game first, for the very good reason that it impacts on a greater number of people. Like 98% of our games are actually club games. So if we play club games, that's inclusive of everybody, because the county players would get the opportunity to play with their clubs. And I think that will be an important impact across the whole of Irish society. And then we can actually make the decision then to resume with the county game. I think either or, it's a contact sport decision that's going to influence it. So whether it's contact sport at club level or county level, I don't see a major distinction between the two of them. But the impact throughout the organisation will be far greater if we actually got the clubs back into action. And John, would club be more difficult to monitor in terms of testing, etc., with huge numbers compared to inter-county? Well, to get into the operation of testing players would prove extremely expensive. So I think we even have to be beyond that point of testing players before they go out on the pitch, because it has already been said, if sporting organisations wish to take on a testing process. They'll have to fund it themselves, you know.
So you wouldn't be doing that even at inter-county level?
Well, I'm not ruling that out. That's
Right.
something that will be discussed among our advisory group, but certainly it's not something that we could do as a blanket across the whole organisation.
And if and when club action resumes, would it be just at senior level? Would it be at all levels? Would juveniles come back?
No, we would hope to bring it back at all levels. I think at juvenile level, I think we'd be possibly looking at no championships up to minor, in the idea that just let the younger people play games and have league competitions for them. At senior level, I think the desire would be there that at club level and both at inter-county level that we run championship knockout competition.
Yeah, in relation to the inter-county, it was suggested that maybe there isn't an appetite for inter-county behind closed doors.
Yeah, I have a bit of an issue about this closed doors concept, because if it's safe enough for the players to be in close contact on the pitch, I think then it's going to be safe enough to have a certain number of people in a gathering in the actual ground itself. And, you know, we're fortunate as an organisation to have such fantastic stadia that I think, like, you know, you take Croke Park for example, 83,000 is the normal attendance, but I'm sure we could put an attendance into Croke Park that could be done in a safe manner. But I think, you know, crowds gathering in that situation will probably come before we even have contact sport.
Yeah, the financial implications are massive for the GAA, and already obviously huge losses. And talk a little bit about that. Like, if there was no attendances at a championship.
Yeah, it is a serious situation for us, and it's one of the things that's quite worrying for us as an organisation, because, like, we operate on a kind of financial profile of the money we take in, such as the 74 million last year, that all gets recirculated. We don't engage in building up massive reserves as the organisation goes. So our whole operation and budgeting this year would have been on the basis of revenue streams coming in from our games and coming in from our sponsors. And looking at the figures at the moment, it's looking like we will end up with a loss of between 25 and 30 million centrally in Croke Park, that is centrally GAA and the actual stadium. And throughout the organisation, taking into account county boards and clubs, the loss for the year for us, if we get no games played, is probably heading in the region of 50 million.
So clubs and those who applied for grants, etc., what happens to them now?
Unfortunately, you know, they've possibly just hit a bad timing with the application. Like, they're just, the money is not there. As soon as the money comes back on stream, we'll be only delighted to get back out supporting our clubs and redistributing the money. But, you know, as I've said to you, a 50 million loss throughout the whole organisation, and we don't keep big reserves. We just won't have the funding there to hand it out, and that's why I'm very conscious that everybody needs to cut costs, and we have done that in Croke Park with our budgets to trim it back as best we can, because we want to be as robust as we can when we get the opportunity to come back.
50 million is a staggering amount of money to lose. If there was if you were able to go to a championship behind closed doors, you would still get what, TV money, sponsorship money?
Yeah, you would
get something.
Yeah, you'd get some revenue streams if you went behind closed doors. But, like, I still go back to the point. I think, you know, if there's contact sport on the pitch, and such is the size of our facilities. Like, I mean, if you had a crowd of 20,000 in Croke Park, I think it would be lost, and everybody would be comfortably social distancing.
So, but ethically, are you against the notion almost of, not ethically, but the core of GAA Championship, it does have crowds. Are you basically against them in your own view? A game with no crowd there.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen, to be honest with you, because I think if the games are on the pitch, there's going to be a certain acceptance that there's going to be a crowd in the actual stadium, and I think that's where it's going to rest.
Okay, so the bottom line is October at the earliest, but if there's no social distancing still exists, there won't be games.
No, I think once contact, the key thing is contact sport. Our concern has to be the players on the pitch, their families and their work colleagues, and they are all amateurs, and it is all a hobby to them all. So in that context, and I know they take it at a very serious level, at inter-county level, and they have a very professional approach to it. But, like, we cannot risk anybody's health. I think when all this is over and we're all back to normal life, I would hate to think as an organisation that we would have made a decision that cost any family a member of their family.
Yeah, and that's the bottom line, and no one can argue with that. But therefore, it does pose the question, at some point you make a call, okay, there won't be a championship.
Yeah, we will. You know, we're holding those dates out, but if we can't realise those dates, then we will have to make more serious decisions and push it out. And if we push it out more, it may well mean then that we'll have to call off either club or inter-county, and then maybe we will have to call off both.
Yeah, you said that you'd be prepared to go into 2021 if necessary to finish a championship. How late into 2021 could you go with a championship for 2020?
Well, I think it would have to start in 2020, and I think you'd be talking about maybe the first 2 months, January, February. But after that, I think if we're back in action, we just have to move on and get on with the 2021 competitions themselves.
So realistically, given how time's moved on, the 2020 Allianz Leagues won't get finished, presumably?
At this stage, I'd be inclined to say we'll struggle to finish them, yeah. No.
And October will be the cut-off date for making a call.
Well, exactly. Like if we get going back around October, November, you'd be talking about probably an 8-week time frame to run off the competitions, and then I just don't see necessarily an opportunity to finish it out.
Okay. We're going to hear more from John momentarily, but we would now like to take a few minutes to reflect on the role of the GAA community has played in the country's response to COVID-19, none more so than the hundreds of frontline workers who count themselves as members of the association. We caught up with a couple of well-known ones this week.